And what if the world we live in was not a benevolent creation, but rather a prison designed by a tyrannical entity known as the Demiurge? The figure of this malevolent creator, who would have shaped the material universe to keep human souls in captivity, has challenged conventional religious beliefs since antiquity. Although rejected by predominant theological currents, this idea resurfaces at various points in history, fueling debates about the true nature of God and creation. How could it be possible that the creator of the world, revered as the Almighty God, was in fact a selfish and malevolent entity? Marcion and the Gnostics pondered this question, and their answers forever changed the way we understand the duality between good and evil. But does the Demiurge, this dark being, still influence the fate of humanity? The concept of the Demiurge, initially a benevolent figure in Greek philosophy, took on new contours over time, especially as Gnostic thought flourished. Plato, in the Timaeus, was one of the first to present the figure of the Demiurge as a divine craftsman who organized the chaos of matter into a harmonious cosmos. Although Plato's Demiurge was not a malevolent figure, it would later be reinterpreted in very different ways by other philosophical and religious currents. It is intriguing how Plato's original idea of a well-intentioned creator was so radically transformed by the Gnostics. For Plato, the Demiurge was a positive force, but for the Gnostics, the same concept came to represent the oppressor of souls, imprisoning them in the material world. How could such an optimistic view of the cosmos be distorted to this extent? The answer lies in the growth of Gnostic schools, which saw matter as something corrupted and imperfect. The Gnostics, unlike the Platonists, believed that the material world was fundamentally corrupt, a reflection of the Demiurge's imperfections. For them, the true God, the source of light and knowledge, was far beyond this world, inaccessible from within matter. This viewpoint led to a complete inversion of the Platonic vision, where the creator of the material world was not admired, but feared. This dualistic thinking gained even more strength with the introduction of the ideas of Marcion, a Christian theologian who rejected the unity between the God of the Old and New Testaments. Marcion believed that Yahweh, the harsh and vengeful God of the Hebrew Bible, was in fact the Demiurge, an inferior and malevolent being. For him, the true God of love was revealed only through Jesus Christ. This concept of two separate divinities revolutionized religious thought at the time, creating enormous tensions between traditional theologians and the Gnostics. This vision of a dualist God, with a malevolent creator and a higher God of goodness, not only challenged Orthodox Christianity, but also provided an alternative explanation for the origin of evil and suffering in the world. After all, if God is all-powerful and good, how can evil exist? For the Gnostics, the answer lay in the corrupt nature of the Demiurge and his imperfect material creation. It was not only Christianity that encountered these ideas. Earlier traditions, like Zoroastrianism, had already discussed the conflict between good and evil through the figures of Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. The idea of a malevolent creator responsible for chaos and suffering resonated with the Gnostics, who adapted this view to their own cosmology. As Gnostic cosmology developed, the Demiurge came to be seen not only as the creator of the physical world, but also as the jailer of human souls. For the Gnostics, matter was not just a flawed creation, but a prison from which the only escape was spiritual knowledge, or gnosis. This philosophical development was a direct response to the deep existential questions of the time. If the world was so full of pain and suffering, how could a benevolent God be responsible for it? The Gnostic answer suggested that the true God, pure and distant, was not involved in material creation, which was the work of an inferior and ignorant divinity. The influence of these dualistic ideas continued to reverberate through the centuries, resurfacing at key moments in history, such as in medieval Catharism, where the material world was seen as the work of an evil entity. Thus, the figure of the Demiurge remained a symbol of spiritual oppression, provoking deep reflections on the nature of the universe and humanity's place within it. However, the idea of a malevolent Demiurge was not limited to theology. Even in more esoteric and philosophical contexts, the concept of an imperfect divinity raised questions about humanity's role in the cosmos. Are we merely pieces in a cosmic game controlled by an entity that is unaware of the true purpose of creation? These questions continue to challenge thinkers to this day. Marcion, one of the first theologians to challenge Christian orthodoxy, proposed a radical separation between the God of the Old Testament and the God revealed by Jesus Christ. His belief that Yahweh, the stern God of the Old Testament, was actually the demiurge laid the groundwork for one of the deepest theological schisms in Christian history. For him, the true God was the God of love and mercy revealed by Christ in the New Testament, not the vengeful God of the Jewish scriptures. This thinking led Marcion to completely reject the Jewish scriptures. He saw no connection between Jesus' message and the Mosaic law. Could Jesus have come into the world to fulfill the law of a cruel and tyrannical God? Or was his mission to free humanity from the grasp of this demiurge? For Marcion, the answer was clear. Jesus came to rescue souls trapped by Yahweh's oppressive law. Marcion suggested that, contrary to what the traditional church preached, Jesus had no relationship with the God of the Old Testament. He saw Christ as a figure who transcended the material world entirely, bringing with him the spiritual knowledge necessary to free souls from the control of the demiurge. This interpretation sparked enormous controversy, as it directly opposed the predominant Christian view. This theological rift was not merely a matter of doctrinal disagreements. Marcion believed that the difference between the God of the Old Testament and that of Jesus was so great that it justified a new understanding of Christianity, completely detached from its Jewish roots. He even proposed a new biblical canon that excluded the Old Testament and included only an edited version of the Gospel of Luke and the epistles of Paul. Paul, in fact, was a central figure in Marcion's theology. He saw in Paul the true apostle who understood the separation between the God of love and the oppressive demiurge. For Marcion, Paul's epistles contained the core of true Christian faith, free from the influences of the Old Testament and its laws. This vision was revolutionary, but also deeply divisive. The early church reacted firmly to Marcion's ideas. His rejection of the Old Testament was seen as a dangerous heresy, and his followers were excommunicated and persecuted. Even so, his ideas continued to influence various Gnostic and esoteric movements in the centuries that followed. After all, how could one ignore the provocative question Marcion raised? Could the God of love revealed by Christ really be the same God who demanded sacrifices and harsh punishments in the Old Testament? Marcion's advocacy for liberation from the material world echoed the Gnostic view that the demiurge had created a corrupted universe. For him, true salvation lay in rejecting this world and seeking union with the transcendent and spiritual God. This placed Marcion in complete opposition to Orthodox Christianity, which saw creation as something redeemable and the God of the Old Testament as the same Father revealed by Jesus. Despite Marcion's marginalization by the Church, his ideas had a lasting impact. His questioning of the relationship between the Old and New Testaments opened the door to deep theological debates that continue to be explored today. After all, how can one reconcile the image of a God who demands justice with that of a God who offers unconditional forgiveness? Are they really the same being? Marcion's impact was so profound that the early church was forced to reaffirm the unity between the Old and New Testaments, establishing the foundation of what we now know as the Christian biblical canon. This orthodox response was, in many ways, shaped by the threat of Marcion's ideas, which insisted on a clear separation between the Creator God and the Redeemer God. Still, Marcion's ideas were never entirely extinguished. Throughout history, they have resurfaced in various forms, whether through Gnostic sects like the Cathars or in modern theological debates about the nature of evil and the relationship between the Old and New Testaments. Marcion's legacy persists, challenging theologians to reconsider questions that many consider settled. Gnostic texts offer one of the most complex and detailed visions of the demiurge. In the Apocryphon of John, the demiurge is portrayed as an arrogant and ignorant entity, known as Yaldabaoth, who believes himself to be the only God. But does he truly hold such power? For the Gnostics, the answer is clear. He is merely an inferior emanation of the true divinity, a creator acting in ignorance of his own insignificance. The figure of Yaldabaoth, as the demiurge, is depicted with the characteristics of a tyrannical ruler, creating the material world as a flawed attempt to replicate the divine realm. However, the demiurge's creation is seen as defective from the start, marked by suffering and imperfection. Yaldabaoth's own arrogance, proclaiming, "I am God, and there is no other besides me," exemplifies his ignorance of the existence of a higher divinity. Gnostic cosmology is steeped in the duality between the spiritual realm of light and the material world of darkness created by the demiurge. But what role do humans play in this cosmic conflict? According to the Gnostics, human souls are trapped in matter, victims of the ignorance imposed by Yaldabaoth and his servants, the archons. To escape this captivity, it is necessary to attain gnosis, the secret knowledge that reveals the true nature of reality. The archons, who assist the demiurge in his task of maintaining control over the material world, play a crucial role in this cosmic drama. They are seen as the demiurge's agents, responsible for manipulating human emotions and thoughts, keeping souls trapped in the cycle of birth and death. This psychological manipulation perpetuates the illusion that the material world is the only reality, preventing people from awakening to true gnosis. In several Gnostic texts, the archons are described as figures of corrupt power, representing not only the cosmic forces, but also the earthly institutions and laws that keep humans in bondage. Official scriptures and orthodox religious dogmas were, for the Gnostics, creations of the archons, designed to keep humanity in ignorance and submission. The process of liberation, according to Gnostic cosmology, is highly individual. It is not enough to follow religious rules or rituals. One must transcend matter through spiritual knowledge. The demiurge, with his archons, represents ignorance and oppression, while the true God, unknown to most, offers freedom through gnosis. But how can one achieve this knowledge in such a corrupted world? The Gnostics believed that gnosis was not accessible to everyone, but only to those willing to question apparent realities. The quest for enlightenment was a lonely and arduous path, requiring the rejection of the norms and values of the material world. This departure from social and religious conventions was one reason why the Gnostics were so fiercely persecuted by the Orthodox Church. In addition to the Apocryphon of John, other Gnostic texts, such as the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Truth, also explore the figure of the demiurge and the role of gnosis. In these texts, the emphasis is placed on the need to break free from the ignorance imposed by the material world. Spiritual knowledge was seen not just as a key to salvation, but as the very essence of human existence. Although the demiurge holds power in the material world, his authority is illusory. For the Gnostics, he is like a tyrant who, unaware of his own limitations, rules through fear and oppression. The true divinity, however, is beyond Yaldabaoth's reach, and those who attain gnosis can transcend his creation. This cosmological scenario, where the demiurge and his archons control the material world, raises questions about humanity's role in the universe. Are we merely prisoners of an imperfect creator, or do we have the potential to free ourselves and reach something higher? For the Gnostics, the answer was clear. The human soul carries within it a divine spark, which once awakened, can escape the clutches of the demiurge. With the rise of Orthodox Christianity, Gnostic ideas, including the view of the demiurge as an evil creator, began to be actively persecuted. For the early church, the belief that the creator of the material world was a malevolent being posed a direct threat to the doctrinal unity of Christianity. How could they accept such a radically opposing view, which contradicted the notion of a singular good God? The rise of Orthodox Christianity brought with it the need to clearly define and consolidate Christian doctrines. In this context, Gnostic ideas were seen as dangerous heresies. The concept that the material world was a prison, created by an ignorant demiurge, directly attacked the traditional Christian narrative, which claimed that God created the world and saw that it was good. The church councils, organized to establish Christian orthodoxy, quickly moved to combat Gnostic ideas. Theologians like Irenaeus of Lyon were crucial in this process, writing apologetic works that refuted Gnostic doctrines and defended the unity of God. In his work against heresies, Irenaeus directly attacked the notion of an evil demiurge, arguing that the creation of the world was good and that evil was a consequence of human free will. The response of the Orthodox Church was relentless. Gnostic texts were destroyed, and their followers persecuted and excommunicated. The Gnostic view of the demiurge as an evil creator was labeled such a severe heresy that it justified drastic measures to eradicate it. The belief that the God of the Old Testament was a malevolent being was simply unacceptable to official Christian theology. However, the persecution did not entirely silence the Gnostics. Though forced into secrecy, their texts and ideas continued to circulate in esoteric circles, influencing other movements throughout the centuries. But why did these ideas persist, even in the face of such repression? Perhaps because they offered an alternative explanation for the problem of evil, a question that continues to challenge theology to this day. The Gnostic vision of a material world corrupted by an evil creator resonated particularly strongly in times of crisis and suffering. Movements such as Catharism in the Middle Ages revived these ideas, asserting that the physical world was the work of a malevolent entity, and that true salvation could only be found by rejecting matter and seeking spiritual purity. The Cathars, like the Gnostics before them, saw the demiurge as a cosmic tyrant whose goal was to keep human souls trapped in the cycle of birth and death. This dualistic view of the universe came into direct conflict with the Catholic Church, which organized the Albigensian Crusade to eradicate Catharism. Once again, the concept of an evil creator was at the center of a spiritual and political struggle. The Church, in persecuting the Gnostics and their spiritual heirs, sought not only to protect its doctrine, but also the power that this doctrine conferred. If the demiurge was a false god, as the Gnostics claimed, then the religious institutions representing him could also be seen as corrupt. Such thinking was far too dangerous for orthodoxy to tolerate. Even after centuries of repression, the figure of the demiurge did not completely disappear. In esoteric circles and alternative philosophies, he continued to appear as a symbol of oppression and ignorance. The idea that the material world is a spiritual prison, controlled by a tyrannical entity, continues to fascinate thinkers and theologians to this day. The question that remains is, does the demiurge still have power over us? Are we truly imprisoned in a world of his creation? Or do we have the ability to free ourselves? These are not just theological questions, but ones that touch the core of human experience, challenging us to question the nature of reality and our place within it. Dualism, the idea of a fundamental division between good and evil, is a concept that permeates various religious and philosophical traditions and profoundly influenced Gnostic thought. Its roots trace back to ancient cultures like Zoroastrianism, where the struggle between the forces of light and darkness served as a powerful metaphor for the cosmic battle between good and evil. But how did these ideas evolve and come to influence Gnosticism? In Zoroastrianism, duality was represented by Ahura Mazda, the god of light, and Angra Mainyu, the force of chaos and destruction. This dualistic system significantly impacted many other traditions, including Gnosticism, where the demiurge was identified as a figure equivalent to Angra Mainyu. For the Gnostics, the material world created by the demiurge was a work of chaos and ignorance, reflecting the ongoing struggle between light and darkness. But is dualism the only way to understand the conflict between good and evil? For the Gnostics, the answer seemed to be yes. The creation of the material world was seen as the demiurge's attempt to replicate the divine realm, but in his ignorance, he created only a distorted version of spiritual perfection. Evil, then, was not merely an absence of good, but an active force, personified by the demiurge. Zoroastrianism's influence was not the only one shaping Gnostic thought. Manichaeism, a dualistic religion founded in the 3rd century, also played an important role in reinforcing the idea of a cosmic conflict between the forces of light and darkness. Mani, the founder of Manichaeism, believed the physical world was a prison from which souls had to escape. This view resonated deeply with Gnostic cosmology, which saw the material world as a battlefield between the demiurge and the true divinity. Through these influences, dualism became a central feature of Gnosticism, which saw humanity as trapped in a universe controlled by opposing forces. But the question remains, to what extent is evil inherent in creation? Is the demiurge truly the only one responsible for the world's imperfections, or do humans also play a role in perpetuating this duality? For the Gnostics, the answer lay in the nature of the human soul. They believed that each individual carried within them a spark of divine light, hidden beneath the prison of matter. The goal of life was not merely to survive in the physical world, but to transcend this material existence and return to the spiritual realm from which souls had originated. This focus on spiritual liberation put Gnosticism in direct contrast with the orthodox religions of the time, which viewed the material world as something redeemable. For the Gnostics, the only possible redemption was to escape the influence of the demiurge and his archons, who kept human souls trapped in a cycle of suffering. The battle between light and darkness was not seen merely as a moral metaphor, but as a cosmic reality. The demiurge, in creating the material world, perpetuated an illusion that diverted souls from the truth. But why was the truth so hidden? For the Gnostics, ignorance was the demiurge's primary weapon. By keeping souls imprisoned in matter, he prevented them from attaining the spiritual knowledge necessary for their liberation. Manichaeism, like Gnosticism, believed that the struggle between good and evil was reflected in all aspects of life. Earthly existence was viewed as a battlefield where the forces of light and darkness clashed. and it was up to humans to choose which side to fight for. However, while many religions emphasized a balance between these forces, Gnostics saw evil as something inherent in the material world, created by the demiurge. This dualistic view not only influenced theology, but also shaped how the Gnostics saw society and power structures. They believed that laws, norms, and social institutions were extensions of the Archon's control, designed to keep humanity in submission. True freedom could only be achieved by breaking free from these structures and seeking gnosis. Gnostic dualism, with its ancient roots, continues to fascinate scholars and theologians. It offers an explanation for the problem of evil that differs radically from the solutions proposed by orthodox religious traditions. Is evil an autonomous force, or is it simply a consequence of human freedom? These questions resonate to this day, challenging our understanding of reality. In Gnostic thought, the demiurge did not act alone. He was aided by a group of entities known as archons, who played a crucial role in maintaining the material world and controlling human souls. But who were these archons, and how did they influence the lives of human beings? The archons, described in Gnostic texts as inferior cosmic beings, were responsible for upholding the structure of the material universe, acting as intermediaries between the demiurge and the world. They helped maintain the order of the cosmos, but this order was viewed by the Gnostics as a prison, designed to keep souls trapped in matter. Contrary to what many religious traditions preached, the archons were not benevolent divine forces, but spiritual oppressors. In the Apocryphon of John, one of the most important Gnostic texts, the archons are portrayed as helpers of the demiurge, involved in the creation and management of the material world. They not only form the human body from matter, but also manipulate the minds and hearts of people, creating confusion and distraction. As a result, human souls remain imprisoned, unable to perceive the true nature of their existence. This psychological manipulation carried out by the archons was seen as one of the demiurge's main tools to maintain his control over the world. But how could humans resist this influence? For the Gnostics, the answer lay in gnosis, the spiritual knowledge that allowed individuals to see beyond the illusions created by the archons and recognize the true nature of the cosmos. The control exerted by the archons extended beyond the individual level. They were also responsible for influencing social and political structures in the world. Laws, institutions, and traditions were seen by the Gnostics as creations of the archons, designed to keep people subjugated and distant from spiritual knowledge. In this sense, spiritual oppression manifested in all aspects of daily life. The archons also played a crucial role in the cycle of reincarnation, according to the Gnostics. They controlled the process of birth and death, ensuring that human souls remained trapped in the material world, unable to escape to the spiritual realm. For the Gnostics, this endless cycle of suffering was one of the most powerful forms of control exercised by the demiurge and his servants. The nature of the archons varied across different Gnostic texts. In some traditions, they were seen as evil and corrupt beings, directly responsible for human suffering. In others, they were considered ignorant entities, believing they were fulfilling divine will, but in fact, perpetuating illusion and ignorance. However, the role of the archons as guardians of the material world was consistent in all Gnostic traditions. They were agents of the demiurge, and their primary mission was to ensure that human souls remained prisoners of the body and matter. But how could a soul escape such a prison? For the Gnostics, the answer was through spiritual awakening, the recognition that the material world was an illusion, and that true reality lay beyond the reach of the archons. The struggle against the archons was both internal and external. On a spiritual level, the Gnostics believed it was necessary to purify the mind and spirit to overcome the influences of the archons and access gnosis. On a societal level, many Gnostics rejected established norms and conventions, seeing in them the reflection of the archons' oppressive control over humanity. The archons, therefore, were not merely a metaphor for the forces of spiritual oppression, but represented a cosmic vision of the control exercised over souls. Their influence extended across all aspects of human existence, from the physical body to social structures, and their function was to maintain the illusion of the material world as the only reality. However, the Gnostics believed that the power of the archons could be overcome. By acquiring gnosis, the human soul could free itself from the control of the demiurge and his servants, transcending the material world and returning to the realm of light. The battle against the archons was thus a struggle for spiritual liberation. a fight that continues to resonate with those seeking to understand the nature of reality. Marcion found in Paul the perfect ally to support his vision of a transcendent and loving God, which sharply contrasted with the demiurge of the Old Testament. For Marcion, Paul's epistles were the only scriptures that revealed true Christianity, free from the influences of Judaism and the Mosaic Law. But did Paul really advocate for such a radical break from the Old Testament, as Marcion suggested? For Marcion, the answer was yes. He saw numerous references in Paul's letters pointing to the existence of an evil God governing the material world. When Paul speaks of the God of this age and the rulers of this world, Marcion interpreted this as an allusion to the demiurge and his archons. This interpretation was central to Marcion's theology, which held that true Christianity was a revelation of a God entirely distinct from Yahweh. The separation between the God of love in Jesus and Marcion's demiurge was so clear to him that it justified a complete revision of the biblical canon. Marcion rejected all Old Testament scriptures and many New Testament texts that he believed were tainted by Jewish influence. To him, only Paul's epistles and a heavily edited version of Luke's Gospel were worthy of being part of Christian scriptures. For Marcion, Paul was the only apostle who truly understood Christ's message. In his letters, Paul frequently speaks of divine grace as something that transcends the works of the law, and Marcion interpreted this as a rejection of the Jewish law imposed by the demiurge. This emphasis on grace, rather than law, was seen by Marcion as proof that Paul grasped the nature of the true God. Thus, Marcion's theology revolved around the idea that Jesus did not come to fulfill the Old Testament law, but to liberate humanity from its dominion. Jesus, in Marcion's view, was entirely separate from the demiurge, and his mission was to redeem human souls from the oppression of matter and law. But how did the early church respond to this interpretation? The reaction was swift and severe. Marcion's ideas were condemned as heresy, and he was excommunicated by the church in Rome. Orthodox theologians, like Irenaeus, refuted Marcion's view, arguing that the Old and New Testaments formed an unbreakable unity. For them, the God revealed by Jesus was the same God who created the world and made a covenant with the people of Israel. However, Marcion did not back down. He continued to preach his dualistic vision, attracting followers across the region. His disciples, known as Marcionites, formed one of the first Christian sects, and his teachings spread rapidly. For many, the idea that the material world was a prison and that Jesus came to set us free was deeply appealing, especially in a context of suffering and persecution. Paul remained central to Marcion's theology. He saw in Paul a model of pure Christian faith, free from the shackles of Jewish legalism. By interpreting Paul's epistles in this way, Marcion reinforced his view that Christianity was a religion of liberation, not obedience to an oppressive law. But this interpretation was rejected by the Orthodox Church, which saw Paul as a defender of the unity between the Old and New Testaments. Marcion's insistence on a separate biblical canon forced the early church to more clearly define what would be considered Holy Scripture. In a way, Marcion's heresy contributed to the process of forming the Christian canon, as the church had to reaffirm the validity of the Old Testament as an integral part of Christian faith. Marcion's impact on the history of Christianity is undeniable. His rejection of the Old Testament and radical interpretation of Paul left a lasting mark on the development of Christian theology. Even after his excommunication, his ideas continued to influence Gnostic and esoteric movements throughout the centuries. Was he completely wrong, or did his vision offer a legitimate response to the questions of evil and suffering in the world? For many, Marcion's message still resonates. The idea that the God of Jesus is a God of love, completely different from the God of law and punishment, continues to be a subject of debate in theological circles. Perhaps Marcion, in questioning the relationship between the Old and New Testaments, opened a path to a new understanding of the Christian faith, a path that, even after 2 millennia, still challenges and provokes. The view of the demiurge as a malevolent and tyrannical creator is one of the most intriguing and controversial in spiritual history. Over the centuries, this idea has persisted, challenging traditional notions of God and creation, and raising deep questions about evil and suffering in the world. Marcion, with his bold theology, laid the foundation for this debate, influencing Gnostic thinkers and spiritual reformers for millennia. If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected some videos for you, filled with profound knowledge and fascinating discoveries that you will love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step to transforming your reality.